Hey, I'm Haley Crowley, founder and CEO of Whimsy and Wellness, and this is the Whimsy and Wellness Podcast, your happy place for health. We're on a mission to make the world a healthier and happier place. Join us each week as we take our love for natural health and wellness into fascinating conversations, focusing on greater health and happiness. Here's to a little more whimsy and wellness in your life. Now here's your host, Meg Ryan.
Okay, friend, before we dive into today's episode, I have to tell you about my new favorite ingredient in my morning smoothies, Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is our one-stop shop supplement in that it contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. I don't know about you, but while I always have great intentions of keeping up with my vitamins and supplements, I always forget to take all those capsules. With Athletic Greens, I get everything I need in one easy scoop. It's also lifestyle friendly, so whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, you can enjoy it too. It also contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. Haley and I are both incredibly passionate about product sourcing and clean ingredients, and that's why we love Athletic Greens. They invest in the most absorbable and natural sorts of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing, strict analytical and microbiological testing, and have the highest quality standards. Athletic Greens is exclusively offering our Whimsy Wellness podcast listeners, you, a free 1-year supply of vitamin D along with 5 free travel packs with your first purchase when you shop with our link, athleticgreens.com/whimsy. So join Haley and I in filling the nutritional gaps in our diet, increasing our energy and focus, aid with digestion, and supporting our immune systems with 1 daily scoop of Athletic Greens and your year's supply of vitamin D and 5 travel packs at athleticgreens.com/whimsy. Okay, now let's dive into this week's episode. Okay, today's guest is a holistic psychiatrist, Dr. Ellen Vora. Ellen takes a holistic approach to anxiety, depression, and other mental health problems, and her insight and wisdom is just so interesting, encouraging, and empowering. You'll hear today how the mental health struggles we face do not define us, and that there are ways to determine and even heal a possible root cause. Ellen is just such a light, and it's so obvious to me how in alignment she is with her purpose, and I think you're going to see that too. So I'm really excited for you to hear from her, learn from her, especially if you've ever struggled with or are currently struggling with mental health, because her teachings and wisdom, like I said, is just really empowering. Ellen actually has a book on anxiety coming out in the spring of 2022. We didn't really mention this in the episode, but please keep an eye out for her book this spring, because once you listen to our conversation today, I think you'll get a small glimpse into how incredible her book will be. Also, remember that the Whimsy Wellness Podcast is on a mission to make the world a healthier and happier place with these conversations. So if you enjoy the show, make sure to share with someone who you think would be encouraged, inspired, or supported. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, letting us know your favorite part, your biggest takeaway, all of that good stuff. We're so grateful you're here. If this is your first time listening, welcome. Please tap that follow or subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening, so you never miss an episode. And I hope you enjoy the show. Okay, let's jump over to my conversation on holistic approaches to anxiety and mental health with Dr. Ellen Vora. Well, welcome, Ellen, to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Meg. Thanks for having me here.
I am kind of nerding out about this topic. They tell you not to play favorites with your babies or your work, but this is so fascinating to me because anxiety and mental health impacts so many people, that I'm just really giddy to learn and help people. So I appreciate all your wisdom that you're going to share. Do you want to to dive in, do you want to just share a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming a holistic psychiatrist?
Like for the first minute I was in medical school, I felt really out of alignment with how conventional medicine is taught and practiced and conceived of. And I didn't really know what to do with that. I was just in crisis basically throughout it. I thought about quitting. I had a lot of just bad attitude about it in general was my main form of coping. And it was, it took me some time to realize that that was like a driving energy. It's what I now think of as like true anxiety, but it actually pertained to my purpose, like to be in this situation where I was pretty sure I wasn't actually going to leave medicine. Like I was where I was supposed to be, but it felt so wrong. And so that's really been a long and somewhat inefficient, but purposeful journey for me, is figuring out how can I learn from other cultures and traditions, and how can I bring to bear lots of different ways of thinking about health and healing, so that when I meet a patient and they're out of balance, how can I help them get back into balance? And so I went on a long journey. I studied Chinese medicine and acupuncture and Ayurveda, and I became a yoga teacher trainer, or I did my yoga teacher training, and studied nutrition and functional medicine. And now I've kind of gone deep into the way that psychedelics are promising treatment in mental health. And so these are all of the different ways I've pursued. How can I help people when they're feeling out of balance in their lives?
I love that. And it's so empowering, when there's more options than just, this is your doom,
Yeah, that is the messaging we get is, I think initially it was supposed to be a way of making psychology and psychiatry scientific, and destigmatizing it was to point out that there's a genetic basis. It was basically trying to help. I think it was trying to say, like, look, it's genetic. It's not your fault. It's not a moral failing. It's a chemical imbalance that we can correct with a pill. Hooray. And that's the messaging that we kind of came of age with. And I don't fault that, I think that there are some industry profit motivated influences within it. But I think also it was a lot of well-meaning scientists basically trying to ground our understanding of mental health in science, make it objective. But I think it's a limited narrative. And what I've learned in my time practicing and studying and working with patients is that while genetics definitely plays a role, it's a predisposition. That's all it is. It's a vulnerability, and it's not a destiny. And so when we are, when we have a strong family history of something like depression or anxiety, there is definitely that tendency within us. But a large, and I think like a more significant determinant of whether or not we manifest with depression or anxiety, it has to do with our environmental influences. That is to say, our diet and lifestyle, like what we eat and how we sleep and the quality of our relationships, and whether we have connection to nature in our lives and meaning and purpose, and whether our digestion is working properly. These are the real determinants of our mental health, and they can eclipse even a genetic predisposition. And that predisposition was only ever that. In functional medicine, we say genes load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. So even a family history of anxiety means your genes plus this environment creates anxiety. But we have some control over the environment that we bathe our genes in. And so it's a really empowering and hopeful message that completely changes how I approach mental health with my patients.
Yeah, it really is. So we've had an episode on stress and the stress cycle. Can you kind of explain to us what is the difference between anxiety and stress? And does everyone have anxiety, or has anxiety kind of become like a buzzword for stress? Do we use them in the wrong ways, if that makes sense?
I think that there's no wrong happening. I do think that we're in a moment right now where anxiety figures really prominently. And I think it has to do with our realities, with systemic racism and injustice, with climate change, with all of these ways that we're very attuned to things really not being right, kind of at the foundation of our society and in the world around us. And so I think like the anxiety that people are feeling right now is valid. I don't think it's that we've like co-opted a clinical term and used it to describe mundane stress. I think people truly are anxious. I also think there's a lot of subtle aspects of modern life that have accelerated recently and are making us more anxious. And that can be just even the fact that we start consuming caffeine at a younger age these days, and it's become trendy to drink very strong coffee. And we are just progressively more compromised in terms of our digestive health with each passing year, all the way to the fact, and this is like a little bit of a controversial idea, but even the role that psychiatric medications play, which sometimes they can be very helpful, but they can also create what I think of as a false mood for some people, where they can even exacerbate anxiety. Certain psychiatric medications can do that directly, like the stimulants. Others can do that in withdrawal or when you're in between doses, like the benzodiazepines and some of the antidepressants. And some can have a cumulative effect over time, like really making it harder for you to feel calm without the medication, like the benzodiazepines, like Xanax, are an example of that. So there's just all these ways that we're making the population is more anxious right now. I think it's valid. Stress is also rampant, no question. It's a slightly distinct category, but there's a lot of overlap. When we have chronic, unrelenting stress, we are more likely to just start. Our nervous system just lives in a place of anxiety.
Right. And I know, like, when someone, with debilitating anxiety, or maybe there's a proper word for that other than debilitating anxiety, but
that works.
Okay. But when someone is really struggling with it and they say, and when I say someone, I've definitely been in this place of I'm having such bad anxiety right now. And someone kind of brushes it off like, yeah, I'm anxious too. And it's like, you don't understand, which maybe is some inner work that I have to do, that someone doesn't have to understand my anxiety. Right. But I guess that's kind of where, I guess we all have our own definition of it, because we all have our own lens to look through and live through, right?
So 2 thoughts on that. One is, like, in terms of do you need to do your own work around that? I think a couple of things come up when we say, like, we're basically, if you read between the lines, we're basically saying, like, hey, I'm really having a strong feeling right now, and I need to feel held and seen and witnessed and understood. So I'm trying to process that out loud with a friend. So you're like, I have debilitating anxiety. And when a friend is like, oh my God, me too, we know, because we do this, we all do it. What the person is trying to do is be like, I feel you, I empathize. What ends up happening instead is that it kind of feels like it dilutes our experience of anxiety. It's like, no, like the way you're talking about it sounds like that's more minor than what I'm trying to process. And it also sort of centers the other person and makes it about their experience rather than just fully holding space for us. We can all work on being better friends in those moments and being better listeners. And basically, this is the person on the other side of the conversation to say, wow, that sounds like it must be really difficult. Tell me more about what you're feeling. What do you think is causing it? What's been going on? What are you juggling right now in your life? And so someone can ask open-ended questions and use validating statements and basically create a container for you to process what you're going through, because there was a reason you're bringing it up. You were hoping for that. And instead you got, yeah, we all do, honey.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't really help. In terms of, like, when we're all saying we're anxious, I think about anxiety differently than how I was trained to. I was trained to think about, like, well, there's maybe mundane stress. We're all like a little mildly anxious. And then there's clinical anxiety when it, like, meets criteria for a diagnosis. It's almost like you have to earn it. You get tested, and did you check enough boxes that you get stamped with, you have real anxiety. And then even within that, there's a lot of different classifications. Like, you could have generalized anxiety disorder, or you could have panic disorder with or without agoraphobia. And so there's all these classifications. And in medicine, there's always this idea of, well, why are you doing something? Does it change management? And the idea behind these different classifications is that it might change management. If it's this kind of anxiety, you might take this medicine. Or if it's this kind of anxiety, you might do cognitive behavioral therapy. But to me, all of those classifications, and even that original bifurcation of, like, does this meet criteria for clinical anxiety or not? I have, at this point in my practice, nearly thrown all of that out the window. None of it changes management for me. To me, if you're asking the question, like, do I have clinical anxiety? Then in my book, you have a meaningful amount of anxiety, and let's address that. And I think, like, gatekeeping whether or not something's real anxiety sort of pertains to whether or not it's worth putting you on a medication. but I'm rarely putting somebody on medication for anxiety. So I don't really have to gatekeep it so much. So it's like if someone is subjectively experiencing their lives as having anxiety, I'm like, okay, let's get started. Let's work on it. And I think about it more as what I call false anxiety and true anxiety, which I can kind of give a brief explanation of. But basically, false anxiety, it's like these aspects of modern life, what puts us into a false mood, a physiologic state of imbalance. This is originally an idea by a woman named Julia Ross, who wrote a book called The Mood Cure. And it's just a brilliant understanding of how some of our moods are real. That's when something happened and we're in a mood as a result. But a lot of our moods have to do with a physiologic state of imbalance. We're in a stress response. We're hungry. We're hangry. Our gut is not functioning properly. We're in our late luteal phase. We're about to get our period the next day. And so we're sort of feeling a mood, but it's a little out of proportion to what we're going through in our lives. It has more to do with a state of physiologic imbalance. And then there's our true moods, our true anxiety. And that's where something very real is happening. And we're having a mood as a result or anxious as a result. But that's not something that we want to medicate away or treat. It's really a call to action. It's there purposefully to help us see something's not right in the world or in our lives, and we need to take action.
I really like that. It's empowering again, definitely. And I really, that resonated with me, that kind of saying what's actually the right term and what is making it kind of an overused term. It's that kind of looking at anxiety that way definitely makes, I would imagine, make people feel like they have to prove, I really have anxiety. I need to prove this to you and explain to you so that, so I really resonated with that.
And what you say there, like to have to prove anxiety, that gets tricky because then unconsciously you're motivated to be more anxious.
Right.
Like your unconscious mind is like, well, what if we suddenly broke out in a panic attack? Then would people believe me and have sympathy? Yeah. So it's like, you don't want to mess around with any time. It's what's called primary gain, like unconscious gain from being sicker is not a fun spot to be stuck in.
And when you're struggling, the last thing you need is to feel like you have to show and explain how badly the struggle feels or is, or that kind of thing. So we briefly touched on this in the beginning, but I think it's super common for us to look at our anxiety or depression or other mental health struggles as our destiny or our identity. I'm just an anxious person. I'm just a depressed person, which is super doom feeling. And yeah, but is that true? Do we have to struggle with it for the rest of our lives? Are we anxious people and non-anxious people?
I don't think of it quite like that. I mean, that's part of the indoctrination that we've had. It's like it's a genetic destiny. And at this point, we've even sort of, what's the right terminology? Like there's camaraderie in being anxious these days. You sort of, I'm like, I'm in that club. I'm one of the anxious people. I can relate to the other anxious people. And there's some comfort in that. And I think that there's even what feels almost a little bit like a betrayal by the people that aren't anxious. It's kind of like, you have some nerve to not be anxious right now. The audacity.
Yeah, you lack empathy.
Yeah, right. And I remember when I was really sad in college, and I remember seeing happy people and just resenting them and being like, well, they just don't get it. They don't see how bad things are. And then I went gluten-free and was no longer depressed. And I was like, I don't know what to do with that. Now I'm happy, but what, have I become an asshole?
Yeah, seriously.
It's tricky, but I think that, I think with anxiety, there's something to be said for, so to go back to the false mood thing, that's where when you're feeling like you're having a moment where you're like experiencing debilitating anxiety and it doesn't feel good, I think the important first step to take is to actually go through what I think of as like the false mood inventory. It's almost like a list you could keep on the refrigerator. Like when you have a baby, you're like, why is the baby fussy? Are they hungry? Do they need to burp? Are they tired? Do they have a wet diaper? It's like, are they teething? And you're like, oh, it's one of those things. And with anxiety, you kind of have to go through that list, but for the grown-up, which is like, are you sleep deprived? Are you getting your period in the next couple of days? Are you hungry? Are you dehydrated? Are you hungover? Are you buzzed? Are you over caffeinated or under caffeinated? Do you have an upset stomach right now? So on and so forth. So things that are a little bit less easily identified in the moment, like is there thyroid dysfunction, or are you deficient in certain micronutrients like vitamin B12 or folate or zinc? And so it's useful to kind of know like what might be the false mood at play in this moment. And if you can identify something, it gives you a step to take. Like if you're like, oh, I am actually hungry, and then you can eat something and then you can reevaluate. Are you still anxious afterward? If you're sleep deprived, no, you can't necessarily take a nap, but it can inform your choices in the future. Maybe you do a better job of prioritizing an early bedtime so that you don't go through life as sleep deprived and anxious. And if there's truly no false mood at play, then it's like worth slowing down and asking yourself, okay, I'm anxious right now. This is like some deep internal wisdom asking me to look closely. Something's not right. And what is it? And then is there something to do about that? So again, it is empowering, it is hopeful, and it doesn't have to be that your destiny is that you'll always be anxious. But I'll just caveat that by saying, I do believe some of us are on this earth to be dialed a little bit more sensitive. And if that's what we're calling, like, I'm one of the anxious ones, I'm all in favor of rebranding that a little bit, like to be one of the sensitive ones. And we all have that ability, but I think some of us have a pretty big antenna, and that's a gift, but it is a liability in our pretty noisy world. So, if you are just like always feeling like overwhelmed by everything happening around you, then it might just come back to like, how do you care for a sensitive nervous system? How do you ground in nature? How do you protect certain time to like not be around other people? You just think about how can you soothe very frayed nerves? And that's sometimes the necessary step.
Yeah, I love that. What are those birds that we used to bring into coal mines?
Canaries.
Yeah. Have you heard Glennon Doyle talk about this?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to share? Will you share that with the listeners? Do you remember that story?
Yeah. So this is like a well-trod metaphor, basically. And Glennon Doyle said it wonderfully. She wasn't even the first or only one. I think it's come up in a number of different books about, especially mental health and female burnout and things like that. But so basically in the olden days, when there was this very dangerous work of mining in caves or mining in mines, they had to, sometimes there'd be a toxic gas, invisible, that could kill people. And so they would bring with them a canary in a cage into the mine because the canary was more sensitive than the humans. And the canary is just like in the cage, chirping and singing. But if the canary stops singing, that's your sign that there's the poisonous gas, the invisible poisonous gas is present. And so it's like a sacrificial canary that basically alerts the humans to get out of Dodge before it's too late. And so it's such a good analogy because basically I think the sensitive people are the canaries in this modern world mine. And when we stop singing, which I think looks a lot like our modern epidemics of things like Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, when our sensitive people are saying, I'm really not well, I think it's something for all of us to pay attention to and to see that what is it about our modern world that's invisibly poisoning us? And I think there are a lot of things going on. We were talking earlier about lead paint.
Right, like, yeah.
There's just a lot of hasty, careless things we've done with substances that can be really poisonous to human physiology. And it's in our environment, it's all around us. And it's not to say like there's no avoiding some of it, it's in our air. But I think that we can have practices for at least listening to our bodies, seeing what our bodies say yes and no to, and having some daily practice for making sure we give our bodies a chance to recalibrate, whether that's like getting enough sleep at night, getting some fresh air sometimes, taking Epsom salt baths. If you have access to something like an infrared sauna, that can be really great. But even just drinking enough water is probably one of the most helpful interventions that we can do. But it has to be good water. Even our water can sometimes be the source of toxicants, which sucks. But it is the truth.
Yeah. And it's inspiring that, if we feel like the canary, if we feel like that sensitive person, that to look at it as, wow, I'm the canary. This sensitivity in me is not me being broken or something wrong with me. What a gift am I to society? And look
100%.
at it from that lens I remember just like bawling reading that in Glennon's book. And like you said, people have said it all different ways, but to just finally feel seen in that, like, oh, okay, just to have something tilted the other way is so empowering.
100%. I'm so glad you brought that up because, it's basically like we need all types of people, right? We need our canaries and we need our surgeons and our pilots. Like we need people who are relatively unflappable because we need someone to fly the planes, but we also need someone to alert us to the presence of invisible toxic gas. And our world celebrates and compensates the less flappable people. We basically say like, that's great. You're so even keeled. Like here, take this high powered, very lucrative job. And our sensitive folks, which sometimes are our artists, our feelers, our healers, they're not necessarily in these positions of being celebrated societally. Sometimes, rarely, but not always. And instead, we've really done a lot of conditioning around like, you're too sensitive, you're too much. And for all of us to just recognize, like, whoever you are, if you're the unflappable surgeon, own it and be proud of it. And if you are the canary, own that and be proud of that. And to recognize, like, it's a bit of a harder path, but it's a high calling.
If you have listened to our show for any amount of time, maybe you have somewhere along the lines heard me confess my love for smoothies. They are such an easy and refreshing way to get nutrient-dense real foods into my body. I used to exclusively mix up my own smoothies. However, I've recently fallen in love with Daily Harvest smoothies. They're perfect for when I'm in a rush and don't have a lot of time, which, let's be honest, is every single day when I'm a busy mom of a 1-year-old. Daily Harvest pre-made smoothies are shipped directly to your doorstep. You simply pour in water, milk, or your liquid of choice, dump in your blender, and you're good to go. Daily Harvest uses organic whole fruits and vegetables, and they are absolutely delicious. I even put my daily scoop of athletic greens in with my Daily Harvest smoothie. My current favorite flavor is the mango and papaya smoothie, and Haley's is the strawberry peach. But I've honestly yet to try one that I don't like. Friend, it just doesn't get any easier, more convenient, or more delicious than Daily Harvest. And good news, Daily Harvest is giving our Whimsy and Wellness podcast listeners up to $40 off your first box when you use code WHIMSY at checkout. So head to dailyharvest.com with code WHIMSY, that's WHIMSY. I can't wait to hear what your favorite flavor is. All right, now back to the episode.
Okay, let's talk about root causes of anxiety. This is something that we just really don't hear a lot about, but it's so fascinating. I'm so confused why in 2021 we aren't hearing more about it. I think it is getting, I don't want to say popular, but it's becoming more known. I just think, how is it not more? We're not talking about it more. But so can you kind of explain for people that are thinking, what do you mean root causes of anxiety, which we briefly touched on, but then, let's just dive into different root causes too.
Yeah. So root cause, this is really like, this is the cornerstone of the philosophy of what's called functional medicine, which is basically implying that conventional medicine is somehow dysfunctional medicine. But basically it's saying if you have heartburn, in conventional medicine would be like, oh, well, your stomach acid is getting out of your stomach into your esophagus, and that's uncomfortable. So here, take this pill that will prevent you from secreting as much stomach acid, and then problem solved. It's the definition of a Band-Aid and symptom suppression. Problem is not solved. You've just suppressed the symptoms, and secretly you've kind of contributed to the original problem. So functional medicine sees heartburn and it asks why. Why are you having heartburn? A couple possible reasons. Is there something not behaving right about your sphincter? Okay, why is that happening? Is there increased abdominal pressure? Okay, why is that happening? Are you pregnant? No. Okay, are you obese? No. Okay. Is there SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, maybe, where there's an excess of bacteria in the upper intestines, which can create pressure buildup. And so sometimes it's one of these root causes of the heartburn. And to take an antacid would actually suppress your stomach acid, which would make it less likely that you're effectively fighting off certain bacteria you introduce with the food you eat, which would only further exacerbate something like SIBO, which would just make the original root cause of the problem worse. And that's a lot of what happens in conventional medicine, is by suppressing the symptom, which was in many ways, sometimes even the body communicating like, look here, something wrong. We've really just made the original problem worse. And so functional medicine says, like, no Band-Aids, let's get to the root. If it's SIBO, let's treat the SIBO. And then no more heartburn, but not because you've suppressed your stomach acid secretion. And so I think of it like, I don't know, this is a very 90s reference, but like there used to be these things called magic eye posters, where it was like, it just looked like a blurry, pattern. But then if you stared at it in a certain way, an image would pop out. And like once you saw it, it was really hard to see it that first time. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Functional medicine, I think of like that. Like once you see like, oh, wait, our health issues, we shouldn't just be Band-Aiding. We should be trying to figure out why are they happening and address that. It makes so much sense. You can't unsee that, but we're not there yet. And I think part of the reason is that it's hard to go through 10 years of medical training. And once you're initiated into that culture, there's kind of like a systemic bullying that makes you talk a certain way and have these rigorous opinions. And you tend to just shoot down a lot of the inquiry and the asking why and the open-mindedness. So doctors are not quick to change. There's a lot of inertia in how we think about things. But root causes of anxiety, it's kind of that false mood inventory I just listed a couple minutes ago. But basically, I'll always look at blood sugar. I'll look at caffeine. The role that alcohol plays is a complex one, and it's not anybody's favorite conversation. But basically, alcohol can contribute to anxiety in the short term and in the long term. And sometimes it's digestive issues. A lot of species of bacteria that are supposed to live in our guts help us manufacture certain neurotransmitters that help us feel calm and not anxious. And when we take courses of antibiotics or other aspects of modern life that compromise our gut flora, we lose those bacteria, and then we don't have as juicy of a amount of neurotransmitters like GABA, so we don't feel as calm. And micronutrient deficiencies, I think nutritionally we're so lost as a country. We have this like food system that really doesn't have our health and well-being in mind. It's thinking about what's cheap and shelf stable and palatable and addictive. And so a lot of us are really overfed and addicted to food, but undernourished. And it's expensive and inaccessible and difficult and time consuming to eat a nutrient dense, nourishing diet. So it's like, it's really hard to pull that off. And so a lot of us are walking around malnourished. And when you're deficient in certain nutrients, you feel anxious, all the way to the way the phone figures into our lives. We look at the phone, we doom scroll at bedtime, and that disrupts our circadian rhythm. So we don't get as good sleep, but also it's just putting us in a stress response right before we're trying to fall asleep. And, social media in general, with compare and despair, and with the sort of relational aggression that happens in comment sections, it ties into this way that we need to feel held in community to feel calm. And right now we just feel like the world is at war on social media. And so it makes us feel uneasy.
Yeah. So how could we go about figuring out what our personal root cause is? Besides kind of running through the list, but maybe we're just, because it is overwhelming, right? It's such a daunting task to try to sit down and figure out. And if we don't have a healthcare provider who's asking those questions, I remember the first healthcare provider that ever asked me about my diet and what I ate was my midwife when I had my baby. And I have lupus. I have a lot of autoimmune illnesses. And it was mind blowing to me when my midwife had me write down what I eat for a week. And I'm just thinking, aren't you here to deliver my baby? Why do you care what I eat? But it was just so mind blowing afterwards. Once, just like what you said, you can't learn it or see it. And so afterwards, I was just very much thinking, wow, how has no one else ever asked me, what do you eat? How much sleep are you getting?
It's really unfortunate. And I remember even in like 10 years of medical training, I probably had like maybe one lecture on nutrition, and it was wrong. I would have been better off without it, telling people to have like skinless chicken breast and low fat dairy. It's like, that is not what I recommend at all. And so you bring up a really important point. If you have lupus or other autoimmune issues, and for anybody listening who has any autoimmune condition or a chronic inflammatory condition, which can be so many things, but everything from eczema to MS and everything in between, if you're inflamed, that's a root cause of anxiety. And it works very directly. But basically, when we are in a state of inflammation, there are aspects of our immune system's signaling molecules called cytokines, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and directly impact parts of the brain. And we now know they directly impact even threat detection centers in the brain. So they're basically telling those parts of our limbic system, we are under threat. Something is not right in the landscape of the body. And so we very understandably feel anxious, and it's designed to motivate us to solve the problem. And on the proverbial savanna of evolution, sometimes those problems were solvable. It was like, you drank the wrong pond water and you're now acutely inflamed. So go rest in your cave. You're probably contagious. Stay away from everybody else and eat good, nourishing broths and rest until your immune system gets on top of this. These days, our sources of inflammation are not straightforward, and they're vast, and they're kind of hitting us on many different dimensions. And so it's a puzzle to be figured out for each individual, but it never hurts to start by looking in the gut. Oftentimes, the gut is really central to autoimmune disease and other chronic inflammatory conditions. And that usually, I like to give people tools that they can use on their own, that's free and accessible, and you don't need a fancy doctor. Gut healing for maybe like minor gut issues. If you have like a little bit of IBS, you can work with that on your own. You can eliminate some of the foods that irritate the gut, like gluten, dairy, industrially processed vegetable oils. You can add in some of what soothes the gut, like bone broth and collagen, and turmeric is helpful, and glutamine can be helpful, and fermented foods taken with starchy tubers. But if you have anything more significant, I do tend to think it's worth working with like a naturopath or a functional medicine practitioner who can test and really understand, is there SIBO, is there a parasite, is there dysbiosis, in which case you want to address that first to sort of really fundamentally heal the gut. And that's often a really good place to start if inflammation is the root cause for somebody's anxiety.
Right. Yeah, that is mind-blowing to me. Just from, the way I was diagnosed with lupus myself was my knee just blew up. We were like, did I tear something? They kept saying in the ER when I'd go in, it's all blown up and I'm on crutches. Are you sure you didn't feel anything pop? Because it's triple the size. And no one could figure it out. And we kept having to have it drained. And it turned out to be lupus, which I remember the doctor saying, which I've shared on here before, just lupus is your body attacking itself. And that was just it. And I remember going home thinking, why is my body attacking itself? And that's, in my opinion, such a shame-filled diagnosis. Your body is attacking itself. And you want to be friends with your body and love your body. And being told that your body is attacking itself is very much like, why are you attacking me? And so it's just fascinating to me that I never even, just right from that diagnosis, I really never thought to ask, why is my knee blowing up? Why is my body attacking itself if that's what's happening, And it's just very mind-blowing to me.
I'll throw out like a couple, like where my mind goes when I ask the why around autoimmune disease, my mind goes to a couple main places. One of them is the way our immune systems are pretty poorly calibrated in modern life. But we basically systemically throughout our lives confuse our immune systems. We lack the diverse ecosystem of beneficial bacteria in our gut that trains the immune system around what's a genuine pathogen, what's a beneficial bacteria. It kind of trains it around tolerance. And then we get all of this like we don't necessarily go through the infectious diseases of childhood. So we sort of miss some opportunities for training our immune systems about genuine threat. And then all of this toxicant exposure that we go through is very provocative to our immune system. So we're really discalibrated or poorly calibrated. I also think about it as related to damage and like the way modern life can damage our tissues. And the immune system, part of what it's doing is scanning for it's scanning for microbes, but it's also like these days, what's in conversations, like our immune system sees a spike protein and they say, that's not Meg, that's not Ellen, that's some weird spike protein we've never seen before. So we're going to attack that. Or it circulates and it might see damage. And if it sees damage, the immune system is also provoked by that. And it thinks, let me clean this up. Something wrong happened here. And there's a lot about modern life that's damaging to our tissues. And that can be even like heavy metal deposits. It can be certain infections, like things like chronic Lyme can hide out in certain places and provoke the immune system. So there's a lot of different ways that modern life provokes our poor little immune systems. They're just doing their best. And I tend to think that there's sometimes a psychospiritual line of inquiry around autoimmune disease. We do know that chronic childhood stress increases our risk of autoimmune disease later. And it has a genetic basis, of course, like everything, but stressors in childhood play a role as well. So I've always wondered, like, when we have chronic toxic levels of stress in childhood, do we internalize some messaging around like not feeling worthy? Or, is it a sort of internalized, internally directed anger rather than like when you feel helpless to like direct that outward in childhood?
Right. Yeah.
Those are some questions that come to my mind always.
Right. No, that makes me think. So what is there ever this line of what comes first, the chicken or the egg type thing? Can sometimes a physical ailment or a physical health problem be anxiety or trauma signaling help, or is it usually always kind of the flip, the root cause of anxiety is this physical thing, or is it kind of teetering?
I think it's a great question. I think every permutation is valid. They all happen. You'll see plenty of, okay, that person's anxiety was just dysbiosis and gluten intolerance, and sometimes it's like you solve that and it was a physical basis for what we call mental illness. But sometimes it is the reverse, that internalized stress, lack of like being conditioned in a way that allows us to have self-love, all of this can sometimes manifest as physical ailments. And I do think a lot of physical ailments are communication from the body. Fibromyalgia, I've always thought of as an interesting one. It sort of, for me, lives at the interface between a physical reaction to aspects of modern life that are poisoning us and has a psychospiritual underpinning where sometimes it's harder to communicate. I'm in pain, like psychologically, like I'm not well, I'm not getting my needs met in my life. It can, for some of us in our circumstances, it can feel safer or easier or more comfortable to say I'm physically in pain, to basically say like, this hurts and I'm not right. Doctor, please look, please help me. But it's actually all a way that the body's trying to communicate, like I'm really suffering. And, I think that the body gets creative in trying to communicate when it has unmet needs.
And it will just keep trying to get our attention until we listen, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it raises the volume of its voice too.
Yeah. It's like, that didn't work. So take this curveball. So we mentioned how eating nutrient dense foods feels so overwhelming in modern day and intimidating and even sometimes impossible, right? I know where I live, it's at least 30 minutes to like a whole organic food store, And so how can we flip that or work with that to feel empowered and prepared to eat nutrients dense food rather than just doom of, I don't know what to eat because everywhere I look, people are saying plant-based, not plant-based. Don't eat this, eat this. This is all bad for you. How can we kind of feel empowered in what we're eating and work with what we have?
Yeah, such a great way to put this question. Yeah, so I think that I do think it's really helpful to drown out the noise of all the different identities and labels that we've arrived at. Like, they're all there for a good reason. They're headed in a positive direction. But I think when we too stubbornly adhere, too dogmatically adhere to a label like I am vegan or I am gluten-free or I am plant-based, whatever it is, I'm paleo, we sometimes miss when our body is saying, actually, now that I've been eating that way for a while, I sort of need the reverse. So like, I was vegetarian for a while, and then I kind of had to be paleo for a while. And then after I did that for a while, I kind of had to be more vegetarian for a while. There's like a happy medium, and it'll vary by season, by, time of year, by where we are in our cycle, by what demands are on our bodies. But I think that the useful compass, the one that I stick to and recommend to my patients, is just to generally err on the side of trying to eat real food and generally err on the side of trying to avoid fake food. And within that, there's a lot of nuance and granularity. You kind of want to always be listening for what your body's craving, because it will guide you, and that will vary minute to minute in a useful way. But even within a craving, you kind of have to discern, is this a drug-like craving, or is this the deep inner wisdom of our body craving? Sometimes your body's like, what I really need right now is pizza. And that's a drug-like craving, at least for me. That's my drug of choice. Whereas when the body is like, I need a juicy steak right now, or I need a bowl full of potatoes, it's often when it's a real food that your body's craving, that's your body saying, I am in need of certain nutrients, and this is what will fulfill that. And it's really tough. I found that it took me probably about 5 years or so to get a healthy rhythm of like how to feed myself good. And I've really depended on my partner a lot. So like, we're in this together and figuring out a rhythm. How do we feed ourselves and our daughter healthy food in a reasonable, like at a reasonable price point, without driving ourselves crazy or making food prep a part-time job? And so the way we make it work in our household is we acquire our food from wherever about once a week, and then we batch cook. So we'll cook a large volume of usually like some kind of well-sourced protein, some kind of starchy tuber, and then some kind of sauteed greens. We pack that up in glass Pyrex Tupperware, where it's already like a ready balanced meal. We put a bunch of those in the fridge, and then we pull that out for lunch or dinner and microwave it. And then when we haven't had a chance to cook, we'll use something like, I like, what is it called? Daily Harvest. It's like a frozen organic meal delivery service. I'll just keep a bunch of those in the freezer, and I can pull that out at lunch if I don't have good home cooked food ready. And sometimes we don't manage to do this. Life throws you curveballs, and then you're not on top of your rhythm with food, and that's okay too. And I think that when we just have to order gross takeout, it's sort of not feeling fragile in the face of that. Just saying to yourself, like, okay, I am a vast ocean, and this is a little bit of an oil spill, but I can accommodate that. And so to just like remind yourself you're not so fragile when you do find yourself having to feed yourself in a way that doesn't always agree with you. You want to get out of your head about that.
Yeah, it is so difficult to not. And it's like, do we have to eat 3 times a day? I know now, having a little one, I'm just thinking, it's dinner already. I just made you
Feeding little ones is relentless. It's exhausting.
Is. It's like, I don't even know what to feed myself.
Yeah.
Are you going to throw it?
Yeah. It's lovingly prepared. Organic food is now all over the floor.
Right. It's for the dog.
It does get easier though.
Oh, good. Okay. So now that we know like some of the root causes that can heavily impact anxiety and mental health, I know you shared the food ones, but what are a few other like actionable, empowering steps that we could take to start relieving some of that anxiety and supporting ourselves?
Yeah. So like the phone is a big one. I think one of the best interventions we can do around the phone is just to get the phone out of the bedroom. If you, at the very least, just don't keep your phone on your bedside table, but instead plug in your charger somewhere else in your home, say goodnight to your phone, like around maybe 9 o'clock, and then have a phone-free bedroom. It's going to improve the quality of your sleep. It'll help you fall asleep earlier, stay asleep through the night, improves your circadian rhythm. So that's a very effective intervention. I also think blue blocking glasses make a big difference. If you want to help with anxiety, protecting sleep is really good medicine. It's hard to protect sleep these days, but light after sunset is such a big aspect of why we can't sleep in modern life. So having a pair of blue blocking glasses that you put on around sunset and keep on till bedtime can really help protect your circadian rhythm. And the flip side of that is getting exposure to sunlight, ideally first thing in the morning, early, which starts the clock and helps you feel awake during the day and then helps you get sleepy at night. Those are a couple quick ones. Caffeine is a whole big, complicated, unfun topic, but with caffeine, like, we credit caffeine and sometimes as being like our one true friend in the world. It's like the only thing that helps and it's necessary and it's cool and I get it and it tastes good and it smells good. But the thing is that it is a common root cause of anxiety. Some of us are sensitive to caffeine. So that does not mean we should go cold turkey off of caffeine. It has a very real withdrawal and you'll be irritable and tired and headachy. But to very, very gradually taper off over the course of weeks can sometimes be a nice way of lessening your overall anxiety burden. And alcohol, like, while we're on the topic of things people hate hearing, like, just while caffeine is not helping anybody's anxiety, alcohol is pretty detrimental as well. And I think I know that it's fun and stuff, but I think alcohol is really not a good spirit in our world. And it's,
I agree.
It doesn't, like, studies have actually really, even though we were all taught for so long that like alcohol, like a little 5 ounces of red wine was a heart healthy choice. No, it's not true. That was industry funded research and there was profit motivating that. And when really good, large, unbiased studies have been conducted, what we've learned is that the amount of alcohol that is the most beneficial to your health amount to drink, it's not 5 ounces a day. It's actually 0 ounces of alcohol per day, every day. So it's really that no amount of alcohol improves health. Any amount of alcohol that we consume is a negative impact on our health. You might still choose to do it. It might be the act of radical self-love for you in your life in any given moment to drink. Like maybe you're at a wedding, you're at a beautiful home-cooked meal, whatever it is, you're allowed to make trade-offs and make choices that aren't just optimizing health for sure. Mm-hmm. But I just want us to have the facts and to know that it's not actually helping our health. And in terms of anxiety, it has a really problematic impact on the way a neurotransmitter called GABA functions in the brain. And basically it rushes our synapses with GABA. So we feel very calm and suddenly confident and like we're not bothered by what was bothering us a minute ago. We like that. But the body needs to return to homeostasis to keep itself safe. Its motivation is survival. So it reabsorbs that glutamate or that GABA and it converts it into glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter that makes us feel on edge. And so basically, that's why we wake up in the middle of the night after we drink. That's why we might feel more anxious the day after heavy drinking. And cumulatively over time, it's why alcohol contributes to anxiety. So it's not anybody's favorite topic, but if you want to help your anxiety, you might want to do a little self-inquiry and self-experimentation around making conscious self-loving choices with it. Maybe rather than drinking just by autopilot default every night, maybe it's a couple nights a week, maybe it's less overall. And that can sometimes make a big difference with anxiety.
Right. Yeah. And we're definitely not trained in this, society that we live in to do those check-ins with ourselves, to do those body scans. And so it does feel kind of weird at first. It's just, or not weird. It just doesn't feel, we're not used to it. Right. But definitely once you do that, once you start doing that, I know a few weeks ago, I was so anxious one day and at night I finally said, what is going on? I haven't been this anxious in so long. And I just did that check-in and I realized I had 2 extra cups of coffee and I normally have 1 in the morning. And so I had a total of 3 and I normally always have a big, huge smoothie and I didn't have my smoothie. And I was, as simple as that might seem, I knew right then I was like, I didn't have all those nutrients that are packed into my smoothie and I had double the caffeine.
Yeah. There's your false mood inventory. You were hangry, I call it you're anxious,
I love that.
And overcaffeinated. Yeah, because like it's the nutrients, but it's also just it was providing your source of blood sugar. So like without that, our body goes into a stress response.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sometimes, I mean, we sometimes get defensive, but we should really think of it as very empowering. That like sometimes these feelings that feel profound, it's part of our identity. Anxiety is sometimes as mundane as like caffeine and blood sugar. And we feel a little bit like, no, not my anxiety. Mine is heavy duty, serious, but like, I don't know, do the experiment, run the experiment and see how you feel when you keep it all stable. And oftentimes the anxiety sort of transforms. It's not that avoidable, unnecessary, false agitation. It's just our sense of purposeful, like, here's what's still really not right in the world. And here's where I want to fight to make it better. And that can still be true, but it doesn't always get us so bent out of shape.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay. To wrap up, our mission on our podcast is to make the world a healthier and happier place. So we have 3 questions that we ask everybody. So the first one, which we could say so many things, but maybe just your number one thing. What's one way your topic makes the world a happier and healthier place?
Oh, well, I guess my topic of holistic approaches to anxiety, I mean, I think that anxiety is here to drive us to make changes, to make the world better, but sometimes it's actually getting in the way of us carrying out our contribution. So the more we can all just get wise about it and figure out strategies to keep ourselves avoiding the avoidable anxiety and listening to the purposeful anxiety helps us make our unique contribution that we're here to make.
Yes, love that. What's something you do for yourself each day for the simple fact that it makes you happy and or healthy?
Well, I listen. It's like a little different every day, but like I listen to what my body needs. I've learned to finally just slow down and listen.
Yes, that's such a good one. We have so much inner wisdom if we just quiet the noise and listen, right?
Yeah.
That's a good one. I like that. What late night snack makes you happiest?
Happiest. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what my answer to that would be, but right now here in Colorado, what I've been having as my late night snack has been cherries. I've just been taking some cherries out of the fridge, rinsing them off and eating them with a spoonful of almond butter after dinner.
So
and it's been really nice.
Yes, I love that. I used to say guilty pleasure late night snack. And then I thought one day we should not feel guilty for having a little pleasure snack at the end of the day. So now I just say what makes you happiest.
Yeah, no guilt whatsoever. Like when you choose what you want to eat from a place of self-love, there's just no emotional hangover ever. And that can be anything, foods that are quote unquote healthy or not. It's just the choice is always like, what's the act of self-love in this moment?
Yes. Okay. So where can listeners find you and continue to learn from you?
I'm all over the internet. I'm at Ellen Vora, MD on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. And my website is ellenvora.com.
Perfect. And I'll link all of that in the show notes for you listeners to connect with Ellen. This has been amazing. I learned a lot. I feel empowered, so I know that our listeners will too. So just thank you so much for spending this time with us. And for listeners, I hope that you found Ellen's wisdom to be empowering and encouraging, that even when anxiety feels so isolating and lonely and dark, that there's hope and everybody's needed here, right? If you're the canary or if you're the worker, the coal mine worker in that analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ellen.
Meg, thank you so much. Be well.
Wow, I love these amazing conversations we get to have. I hope you heard something today that inspired you, that made you smile, and that brought just a little more happiness into your life. If you love this podcast, will you help other people find it? You can do that in 2 really easy ways. First, take a minute right now to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to me right now. Second, take a screenshot of this episode and share it on Instagram. Don't forget to tag us. Your honest reviews and recommendations go a lot further with people than you think, and we can't thank you enough.